You're listening to Linked AM. Tell your story on Linked Live and get noticed. You're listening to Carl Wolfenden on the Business Class Show and is not always affiliated with the guests and the topics discussed. Any financial statements are the opinions of the individual, and you should seek professional advice before making any decisions. Upgrade your listening to Business Class, the show that puts you in the big leather comfy seats. So sit back and enjoy our take on the trending business issues of the week.
Howdy, folks. Here he is, the Texas Brit, the guy with the stiff upper lip, filling his 10-gallon hat and his cowboy boots, Carl Wolfenden.
Good morning, and welcome to Linked AM. And again, we're getting through all of this crazy stuff that we're talking about at the moment. And so, last week, of course, we moved into our new virtual studios, and we had Tony Portman on, and we were talking about all that new virtual space that we have and all that great stuff. And of course, you're in our virtual studio, and I was thinking about it the other day, and a word came up in conversation, and it says we're all in it together, and it kind of reminded me of a book that we're actually going to be reviewing this Friday on the website, a book, and it's called We're All in It Together. And I've actually got the author, Mike Robbins, actually in the studio, our virtual studio, this morning. Thanks for joining me, Mike.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Carl.
So I've been reading this. I haven't got through all of it yet, but I've got the book here. There you go. Let's just show the viewers and the everything, and the listeners. Well, you'll just have to check out the link to the video when you look at it. But what a very current and topical title that you chose. I bet you didn't think you were going to be that topical when you wrote the book.
No, not at all. In fact, someone on my team the other day said to me about it, he thinks that it's timely, but also timeless. Because, when I wrote this book and was working on it last year, Carl, of course, I had no idea it was going to come out in the midst of a global pandemic.
Yep.
And, we are hearing lots of leaders in the media and politics and business use the phrase, we're all in this together. And even though, my book is really about how to create a culture of high performance, trust, and belonging, one of the reasons why I think people are using this phrase a lot right now is because we intuitively know that in the midst of a crisis or a challenge, we really need to lean on each other if we're going to get through it. I also think we know that if we're going to do anything meaningful or important, we can't do it together. We can't do it alone. We got to do it together. So we got to sort of lock arms with the people around us and be able to, make our way through anything that's important to us.
I think it's very important. I mean, on the show we've had many, subject matter experts and business owners and CEOs, etc. And what we try and do is we try and instill, to the viewers and the listeners and the readers of the website, these are the types of things you have to put in place to be successful. I think we've all been part of a team. And of course, you've got a background in Major League Baseball, so you know all about team. And I'm not even going to say I'm anywhere near to your professional as such. But at the end of the day, I was an assistant coach to my boys' soccer team.
Okay,
and you've got to think about that. They all have roles to play.
Yep.
And if you're just an individual, it's funny. I look at some of these teams. I'm not going to mention any teams that are out there, but I look at these teams and I look at all the individual players, and they're fantastic. Their stats are up there, etc. But they never get to where they need to be because I don't think they play as a team. They play as individuals. Is that what you find?
Absolutely. Well, and I grew up in California where I still live and played baseball all growing up and, got drafted out of high school by the Yankees, but didn't sign because I got a chance to play baseball in college at Stanford, then got drafted by the Kansas City Royals out of Stanford and did sign a pro contract. My pro career got cut short because I got injured. I was a pitcher and hurt my arm pretty early on, but basically played baseball for 18 of the first 25 years of my life, Carl. And that thing you were just talking about, I found to be fascinating, particularly by the time I got to college and was playing professionally, that it wasn't always the teams with the most talent that were the best teams. I mean, you need to have some talent, whether it's in sports or business or anything, right?
Yeah.
Talent matters. However, you can get a group of athletes in sports together that are really talented and may even put up good numbers, statistically, if you will, once they get to the professional level. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they have good team chemistry. And one of the distinctions that I learned as an athlete that I talk about a lot to leaders and teams all the time is the difference between our role and our job. Our role is what we do specifically, and everyone's role is important. Some roles are more important, sexier than others. Obviously, if you're the CEO of a company, or you're the head of engineering or the head of sales or the head of HR, those roles, anywhere down through the organization, the role matters. But what matters more is our job. And our job on a team that really thrives, everyone knows they have the same job. Your job is to help the team win. And if you put your role above your job, now it becomes, I'm more interested as the head of HR in a bunch of our deliverables. I'm more interested if I'm the head of engineering in what's going on in engineering than I am in actually the team being successful and winning, which ultimately, and most CEOs know this, they want everyone on their executive team and everyone in their organization to get up in the morning and take that ownership mindset of, we're going to win as a team, as a company. Even if the company's huge and has, tens of thousands of employees, if you have people that take that kind of mentality, you're going to have a really successful company.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you work with Google and Microsoft and those huge conglomerates and such, but as you say, you can still transplant that mental, that psychological sort of approach to it. Because when I was a young kid, I'm still a young kid. Hey, we're both young, but. I know I'm going to get lots of emails about that, I tell you. But
it's all relative. It's all relative.
All relative, absolutely. I feel like I'm a 10-year-old. But at the end of the day, when I was, working, I've always worked in media. I've always worked in media as such, and we had a team around us, etc. But I always thought I was better than anyone else, because and I used to think, Johnny, I'm gonna have to carry that guy because But at the end of the day, he had a special role that I couldn't do.
Totally.
And I got to a point where I actually started to accept, and this book is really making me, sort of think about this, because I think you have 4 pillars, don't you? You have 4 pillars that you work on. So the first pillar, it's create psychological safety. Is that so? Explain what that is.
Basically, psychological safety is group trust. That means the group is safe enough for me to take a risk, speak up, disagree, try something and even fail, and know that I'm not going to get shamed, I'm not going to get ridiculed, I'm not going to get made fun of, I'm not going to get kicked out of the group simply because I disagree or I try something different. And what we know, Google, in fact, did a study a few years back. They spent 3 years studying what are the necessary conditions to create high performance for teams. And they brought in researchers and scientists and crunched a lot of data, really trying to figure this out in a scientific way. After that 3-year study, they came back with some findings. And the number one, by far, most important aspect they found in their study was psychological safety. And I talked to Karen May, who was the head of learning and development at the time at Google, about this. And I said, were you surprised by any of the findings in this study? They called it Project Aristotle. She said, we weren't surprised that psychological safety was important. What we were surprised about was how important it was. Basically, if a team has it, they've got a chance to succeed. If they don't, it's very difficult. Back to your sports analogy, it's like a bunch of really talented athletes kind of doing their own thing, not really being a team. That's the same thing in business. If we have a team without psychological safety, you can have some individual stars that can still do, a good job individually, but the team itself doesn't have a ton of trust that people can actually work together and collaborate with one another.
Yeah, I think you talk about the fact that somebody has to feel that they can actually speak out and actually and challenge somebody, and not get sort of ridiculed or why are you asking that question, because that's important.
Well, and also, that people are empowered. There's a story I share in the book about the Golden State Warriors basketball team that I follow. They're our local team here that I've grown up rooting for. But in the NBA Finals in 2015, when they won their first title, they ended up winning 2 more and went to the finals 5 years in a row. There was a moment in the finals that they made a change to their starting lineup. And it was kind of a big deal. You don't normally change your starting lineup in the middle of the NBA Finals. And the story that came out after was that it was one of their young assistant coaches who had the idea. He looked at a bunch of film and looked at a bunch of research and said, I think we should change the lineup. And after it went well, Steve Kerr, who was the head coach, gave this guy all the credit. And he said, look, if it had failed, I would have taken responsibility. But the fact that it worked, I'm going to give this guy, Nick Urin, the credit who did it. And the backstory of that was that the Golden State Warriors had created an environment with their coaching staff that even Steve Kerr, who's the head coach, who'd won 5 NBA titles as a player and had a ton of, success, was able to empower his team that, hey, you can speak up. Even in the middle of the NBA Finals, this young guy on his staff said, hey, coach, what if we change the lineup? And he did it, and they won, and he gave that guy credit.
That is great. I mean, I think you're right. It's having that confidence that because you're going to have a leader of a group of a team, but allowing that leader, in this case Steve Kerr, to empower, as you say, those people. Well, or the second pillar that you talk about is inclusion, isn't it?
Yes.
And sort of inclusion and belonging. And last year we did a big feature on inclusion and diversity, and I learned a lot. And I actually learned that if you do have a diverse and inclusive team, you can be more productive, and that can have an output of either revenue or it could be or whatever the goal is. So it's important to have a good mix, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, what we know, the research shows, it sounds like you focused on this last year, that more diverse teams are more successful, more effective. What we also know is if you create diversity, what you need to do is really focus on inclusion, meaning the people who are in positions of authority or in positions of privilege, of power, in the dominant roles, include people who may not be, so that that goes back to the psychological safety. So people's voices can get heard, some different, opinions that you may not necessarily have. But what I found when I was researching this, Carl, is that what we ultimately want to get to with our teams is a place where people feel like they belong. Because belonging is a fundamental human need. You think of Maslow's hierarchy, right? It starts with physiological needs, then it goes to safety needs, right? We know that.
There you go.
What do you got?
I got
you got it right there. You got
the pyramid.
You got the pyramid.
Yeah, absolutely.
So after physiological and safety, which, by the way, we're focused on quite a bit these days with the pandemic, because, again, people are focused on their own well-being physically, and then safety. Do I have a job? Do I have income?
Yep.
But once we move past that, the next level, is the need to belong, is the third along the pyramid. Then you get to esteeming needs and ultimately to self-actualization. But that need to belong is fundamental. And so if we can really focus on creating an environment where, regardless of my race, my gender, my background, my orientation, my seniority, I've been at the company 20 years or 2 weeks, that I really feel like I belong here and we belong to each other. That's an easy concept, not always easy to actually manifest, but really important for great teams to do.
I think what we found last year was that people didn't really understand how to do that. And so there's a learning curve there, but it's very important. It's great that you cover this in the book. And the third pillar that you have, I'm going to embrace sweaty palmed conversations.
Yes.
Okay. So where did this come from?
Well, so I had a conversation with a mentor of mine years ago, and he said to me this great thing, Carl. He said, Mike, you know what stands between you and the kind of relationships you really want to have with people? I said, what's that? He said, it's probably a 10-minute sweaty palm conversation you're too afraid to have.
Right.
He said, if you get really good at those 10-minute sweaty palm conversations, you'll have fantastic relationships with people. You'll build trust. You'll resolve conflicts. You'll give feedback. You'll receive feedback. You'll talk about the elephant in the room. He said, if you do like most of us and you avoid them because they can be awkward or uncomfortable or they get hard or people get upset, he's like, then you end up being a victim of who you work with, who you live with. He said, but if you lean in to the discomfort and have those conversations sooner rather than later, it'll benefit you, your relationships, and ultimately the teams you're a part of. Now, look, he was right. Those are hard conversations. Most of us, myself included, don't particularly love having them, but teams that really thrive have the ability. They create that psychological safety, they create that sense of belonging, and they're willing to engage. We embrace conflict. We talk about hard things. We make sure we have the conversation in the room, not after the fact, right? We talk to each other, not about each other.
Yep.
And part of that is practice, because once you and I say, Carl, if you and I work together and we have a few of those conversations, we then learn, okay, this is how we need to engage with each other. If we're part of a team where we do that together, now all of a sudden it makes what's normally really difficult to do a little bit easier, and a lot safer. And ultimately, I hear all the time from leaders in teams that I work with that, he doesn't really like conflict, or she really avoids conflict, or we can't really bring things up, or it's really a problem when we disagree. Especially out here in California where I live and work with a lot of companies in Silicon Valley, everybody wants to be happy and positive all the time, which is great. But the reality is we have to talk about hard things. And right now we're going through these challenges collectively and globally that it takes a lot of sweaty palm conversations to make decisions that we have to make right now about the business, about people, about what we're going to do. And the more a team and leaders are able to embrace those conversations, the better it is for everybody.
And I think it comes from the leadership as well, of allowing that to happen. Because I remember one of my mentors, he used to say, look, if I have a situation, I'm going to take my rank off and we're going to get in a room and we're going to talk about it. And I don't care what you say to me. It's not going to be a problem unless it's offensive or you hit me. But literally, we said, I want you not to think of me as the CEO. I want you to think of me as your team member. And if we have that conversation now, I may disagree with you, but I want to listen to what you say. And as long as that culture, and again, we go back to the culture of a company, as long as that culture is there and you feel comfortable doing it, then we talk about culture all the time. And I think that that's something that needs to be instilled so the employees know that they can do that.
Absolutely. Peter Drucker famously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I agree with him 100%, because the idea that if you have that kind of relationship, if the senior leaders can take off their rank, as you said, it sounds like, you had an experience with this, then you can have conversation, human being to human being, teammate to teammate. Yep. We're in this together. Let's talk through this and figure out how we get to a solution.
Absolutely. And the fourth pillar I really like about care about and challenge each other, which actually goes hand in glove with what we just talked about, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And we have to be able to do both of these things at the same time. We've all been in an environment where it's really caring and nurturing. It feels good. It's all warm and fuzzy. But if that's the case and we don't get challenged, we can't individually and collectively produce our best results. We've also been in environments probably over the course of our lives and careers where it's super challenging and people get up in each other's faces. And, I learned this in sports. I've seen this in business. Like, we just push, we just tell it like it is. We're really direct. And that's great. But it's like people are then don't feel that psychological safety, don't feel that belonging, don't feel like they can really sort of relax because someone's always, breathing down their neck. So what you got to be able to do is do both at the same time. I interviewed one of my old baseball coaches, Dean Stotts from Stanford, on my podcast a number of months ago. And he said this great thing, Carl, to me. He said he coached at Stanford for 37 years. He since is retired, ton of success. He said, Mike, my philosophy for coaching over the years was always this: I got to love them hard so I can push them hard. And I said, what do you mean? He said, I knew that if I was going to get the most out of you or any of your teammates and all the teams that I coached over all those years, the first thing I had to do was let you know that I loved you and cared about you as a human being. And if you knew that, then you would give me permission to push you as hard as I needed to push you to get you to produce the result I needed you to produce. He said, but if I didn't continue to let you know how much I cared, you wouldn't let me push you. And when he said that, I said, Dean, gosh, that's such a great, philosophy for coaching, but also for leadership, and for teams, that if we can really continue to commit to each other and demonstrate how much we care about each other, then we give each other permission implicitly and sometimes explicitly to push each other and challenge each other so that we can ultimately bring out the best in ourselves and everyone around us.
Well, absolutely. And I think, it leads itself to one of the things that, the reason why I know about Maslow's, theory of behavioral, with the old pyramid here.
The pyramid,
is because we have a business that looks after performance improvement and incentives, and we know if we embrace somebody and we show them that the company organization cares, then we know then we can then put actions into place because they know that, okay, well, you do value me. And so therefore now I'm going to go and do the things you just asked and sort of thing.
Absolutely. And the thing about caring is that we can care about people whether we actually like them or not. We can care about people whether things are going well or not. Look, I've had conversations over the last few weeks where I'm talking to leaders who are having to furlough employees or lay them off or make really difficult decisions. And my response when they ask, what should I do or how do I handle this? The first thing I say is, look, I don't know exactly. It's hard. This is not an easy thing to do as a human being. But there's a way to go about even making hard decisions about the business and communicating bad news to people, and you can still do it with a sense of care. Same thing when we push people and challenge people. We want to get the most out of them. We want to motivate them, right? Sometimes people need some tough love, clearly, depending on their personality or their style or the nature of the business or their performance or lack thereof. But you can push people and challenge people really directly, but do it with care. And they'll actually, more often than not, respond a lot better if we do it that way.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think, with everybody working remotely, mostly the non-essential businesses and everything,
Right.
It really is a case of, making sure that you understand there's somebody there for you.
Yes.
There's somebody you can turn to, etc., and showing that you care about them, because this happened, and I can't remember when it was. It was in the Europe we had a big late 1990 crash, and people were having to be furloughed and laid off, etc. And I think it happened over here, but I only came over in 2000. But but literally, what happened was that the people that were the most productive, etc., if they didn't feel valued, they left when everything came
Sure.
back better. So
Yep.
they left and went to the competitor. So again, it's this time you need to look after your staff and the people that you care about and the people that you want to bring back.
For sure.
So they don't go wandering off somewhere.
That's so true. When I first started partnering, we started partnering with Google about 10 years ago. It was during the recession. And I remember when I first started doing some work with some teams at Google, I noticed they were hiring people. They were still really investing in caring for people at the time, which most organizations that I was working with and talking to just weren't able to do that financially, given what was happening. And I talked to some leaders at Google, and they said, look, we know the economy is going to turn around here. We hope sooner rather than later. And we also know that our people are going to remember how we treated them and what we invested in, even during this time. Like, we got to run our business and be smart like everybody else. But we also know that investing in people always pays off, and caring about people you're never going to regret caring about people ever in life. You ever say, I just cared too much about that person.
Right.
Like, that doesn't mean we never get taken advantage of, or we don't ever have, disappointments or frustrations with individuals. But again, caring and being kind to people genuinely isn't usually something that we can do too much of or that we regret doing.
Well, that goes full circle to the title of your book. We're all in this together. And I unfortunately, we've come up to the end of our segment, but I think, we've got a lot to, because as I say, we're reviewing the book, We're All in It Together by Mike Robbins, this Friday on the website. And, but I'm about 2/3 through it, etc. I think there's going to be a lot of questions that I have of you, Mike, that I'd love to bring you back on,
Absolutely.
and maybe deep dive into this, because this is a fascinating and very timely, topical situation. But as you say, it's timeless, because it doesn't matter what situation we're in. We all have teams, and we all have goals and objectives we have to do. So thank you so much for joining me this morning, and I'm looking forward to getting into this and then having more conversations with you.
Thanks for having me.
Well, that was Mike Robbins, and of course, he was the author of, or is the author of, We're All in This Together. And that was a fascinating conversation, because, one of the things that we've all learnt, I think, over the past, couple of months, is that we're stuck in our rooms. I'm in my study here, in my virtual studio, is that I'm not alone. I've got lots of people that I can turn to, and we still have goals and objectives we've got to get to. So having those people, even though they are remote, having them that you can trust, you can talk to, and have those, as you say, sweaty palm conversations with, even through video, I think it's very important to have that. So please. I'm going to put the link on where you can get the book, and also the review. So read it, get it, and do what Mike says. Let's get in it together. Thanks so much, and have a great day. Bye.